In this video, we're going to continue to talk about your upcoming summative and the creation of your tools class, and we're going to create a tool to deal with all the multiple choice questions that people have been creating in some of their games. So our first major assignment included, for many of the students, a multiple choice question. And what they often did was they just simply printed out the question to the screen and printed out all the possibilities, and then had some set of conditional statements to check if the person was right or wrong. Well, it turns out I can actually write a method to do this. And in order to do this, I first need to think exactly about how I'm going to store the information for each question. So what I do is I make an array of strings, and I set it in a very specific manner. The first element is always going to be the question, and the very last element, let's just come over here, the very last element is going to represent the correct choice, and everything in between are the possible multiple choice options. So, question 1, the question is, what is Mr. Miskew's first name? And our possible choices are A, Paul, B, Doug, C, John, and the correct answer is A. My next question might be, what is the color of the sky? A, red, B, green, C, blue, it should be D, orange, and we know the correct answer is C, so my last element is C. So again, this approach is very dependent on me making a decision in advance of my code of how am I going to set up my information. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come into my tools method, and I'm going to make a tool in here, and for now it's going to return void. It's going to return nothing, and it's going to be ask question, and it's going to take as a parameter an array of strings. So what I can do now is if I come back to my tool tester, I can do this. I can invoke ask questions, and I can actually pass Q1. So what that's going to do is it's going to take Q1, which is this specific question, and it's going to go and invoke the method askQuestion in $PM. And so let's remind ourselves how this is set up. So if I was to present a multiple choice question to the screen, the first thing I'm going to do is print out the question, and then print out all the possible answers, and then take an input and cross-check that input with what the correct answer is. So if we know the first element, which is located at index 0, is the question, we're going to print this out. So I'm going to go system.out.println q at 0. So the reason this works, now remember, if I invoke ask question and I pass it q1, which is this one, we're going to come in here, q is going to be the array q1, and it's going to print out what is your name. So if I come back to my tool tester again and I run this, I get, let's comment out these ones up here. Your testing file could be full of commented out lines like this. It says, what is Mr. Miskew's first name? So what's the next thing I have to do? Well, the next thing I have to do is I have to print out each of the possibilities. In this case, there's 3. And so what I can do is I can write a loop. And that loop can go from this index 1, or the second element, to the second last element. So if we come back into our tools class here, what I can do is I can go say, we're now going to print out possible answers. So I'm going to say for int I equals, and let's just to help us out here, let's select this array, and let's just keep it in here so we can look at it. We're going to comment it out now. So again, we want to start at index 1, so I is 1, and I want to go I is less than. In this case, I want to print out index 1, 2, 3. So I could say I is less than 4, I is equal to I plus 1. However, remember, I could have 5 or 6 possible choices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what is this index relative to the length. Well, the length of this is 1 element, 2 elements, 3 elements, 4 elements, 5 elements. So this is index 4. So I'm going to say q.length minus 1. And if I go system.out.println q at I, watch what happens when I run my tool tester now. What is Mr. Miskew's first name? A. Paul, B. Doug, C. John. So now what I want to do is I want to take an input. So if I'm going to take an input, I'm going to actually create a scanner object here. Come in here, I'm going to import this. So I'm going to say system.out.print input response. And I'm going to take this as a string. String input equals, and we'll put nothing in there for now. And I say input equals s.next. And so if I come back to my tool tester now and I run this, I get what is Mr. Miskew's first name, and it's waiting for me to input a response, so I can put B. And of course the method finishes now, and it exits. And the beauty of this now is if I change this with Q2, I get the same thing. But before I'm finished, what I need to do is I need to actually have this now checked. So remember, the last element contains the correct answer. So I'm going to say if input dot equals, and we're going to check q at q dot length, so minus 1. So this takes the last, basically access the last index in the array q, and check if it's the same as the input. Correct. Wrong. So what happens now is I run this, it says, what is Mr. Miskew's first name? If I put B, I get it wrong. If I run it again, and I put A, I get it correct. And the great thing now is I've taken a little bit of time to write this code in my tools class. And what I can do now is I can just copy this and I can say, well, I'm going to ask question 1, now I'm going to ask question 2. So I run this now, it says, what is Mr. Miskew's first name? It's Paul. And then notice it automatically jumps into my next question. The sky is orange, and that's wrong. Of course, you can tweak this however you want. You can change the look. A nice thing to try is to make the question randomize the order that it prints out the correct responses. And again, to do that, you have to think about how am I going to store that information in my array. So here's another example of a nice tools class that you could use. Now, one last thing before I kind of wrap this video up is, let's say this was part of a larger game where I want to keep track of my score. So I had some variable up here called score. And every time I get the question right, I'm going to get 1 point. So what I can do is I can actually come to my tool class, and instead of returning nothing, I can actually return an integer. And basically, if you think of it like this, if I get it correct, it returns, say, 1 for 1 point. And if I get it wrong, it returns 0. Now you'll notice right away when I put int here, I have an error. The reason I have an error is because, remember, this is a method. If I'm saying it's supposed to return something, and we look in the code, it doesn't return anything. And we can hover over here and it says, this method must return type int. So if we come down here, we get it correct, we're going to return 1. And if we get it wrong, we're going to return 0. And now what happens is that once this method executes, essentially that line becomes a 1 or 0. So I can do this. Score is equal to whatever currently is in the score plus that value. Score is equal to whatever is in the score plus that value. So if I run this now, it's going to execute this method using Q1, what is Mr. Miskew's first name, And if I get it correct, what it does is it returns 1. So what happens is score, which is currently 0, I'm going to go 0 plus 1, which is 1. And then when I hit enter, score becomes 1. So then it says, what is the color of the sky? And we know the answer is C, blue. So if I put C, so this becomes, what is score currently? 1 plus, and if I get it right, I get 1 point. So when I'm done, my score is 2. So think about your first assignment, all of that code you wrote. Think about how much of that was simply setting up those questions. You can condense that into one method inside your tools class. Another nice little tweak that people try and do is they try and write their ask question method where you can make multiple guesses, and depending on the number of times it takes you to guess the correct answer, a different score is returned. Anyways, I hope this helped, and in our last video, we're going to take a look at how we might take a coding bat method and put it into the tools class.